Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through Oil Industry 101. This is kind of give some people some information about the oil sector. The reason why I want to do this is there's a lot of misconceptions about the oil industry in general, and a lot of that's being pushed by the UN 21, which is pushing to get away from a carbon-based economy. So I really want to highlight different aspects of oil and its impact. So the top producing countries in the world are Saudi Arabia, United States, Russia, China, Iran, Canada, UAE, Mexico, Brazil, and Kuwait. Basically, Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of oil. So they basically dictate a lot of what OPEC does in terms of production. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as you're watching the price of oil and what's going on in the world. Saudi Arabia is the big stakeholder in terms of the gaining from the oil cycle. Plus, their cost per barrel is a lot lower than it is in other countries, so they can afford low oil prices for a certain period of time, but over time it's actually going to impact their treasury, and we're seeing that with the case of Saudi Arabia recently, where they're running billion dollar budget deficits that they've had to go into the reserve funds to actually balance their budgets. Let's look at the proven reserves. This is another area you need to bear in mind. Canada is ranked number 3 in proven reserves. Now, when you get up to countries like Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, because those countries are kingdoms or have a certain level of government control, the information may not be 100% accurate in terms of the proven reserves. Because again, it's an estimate, but also it's information that they don't want to get out in case the proven reserves aren't as high as what they are, because it's about control, and you need to bear that in mind when you see certain things about it. The bulk of Canada's proven reserves are in the oil sands, but we do have significant holdings offshore as well as in the Arctic. Now, I wanted to show you this one. Is when we talk about the top 10 emitters, Canada always comes up in terms of its production in terms of greenhouse gases on a per capita basis that were high. But in general, Canada is quite low when you look at overall its emissions, and even the oil sands don't contribute a significant amount to the carbon dioxide issues related to the emissions. The other thing that I want to bear in mind here is if you look at the top 3 emitters here, that they account for the bulk of the exports and import trade with Canada. So we're already dealing with high emitters. So if people are so concerned about climate change, then why wouldn't they be talking a little bit about how we import or export goods into this country? Because we are bringing a lot of those goods that coming in are heavily polluted background as part of the cost of those productions. But nothing's ever said on that, and that's something I wanted to bring to the forefront. Now, this is a good table to kind of show you through and walk you through it. What I did is I picked the top 10 oil producing countries. Then what I did is overlay the extraction method. So you'll see most cases the countries are split between onshore and offshore. When you get into Canada and the US, where the US is doing a lot more fracking out in North Dakota, and Canada's using the oil sands. But what I really want you to look at here, and this is where people don't seem to understand when you start dealing with certain countries, we have what they call a democracy rating. That's basically to do with freedoms and flow of what happens in those countries in terms of charter rights and freedoms. But look at where Canada's ranked on democracy ranking, 9. So our oil itself is not influenced by any sort of human rights issues. But when you look at other countries like Saudi Arabia, which is ranked 108, you look at UAE, you look at Brazil, you look at Russia, you look at China, all those countries have poor rankings when it comes to human rights. But nobody ever talks about that in terms of the oil. It's all about that dirty oil coming out of Alberta, but not where these other countries are coming into play. The other thing too is the environmental ranking. Now that looks at all aspects from water, air quality, all aspects of basically environmental. Canada's ranked 24. The only close Middle Eastern country is the UAE. And you see that we're pretty close there. But look at how we compare to Saudi Arabia. We're a bit better in Saudi Arabia. But look at China. Look at Russia. Look at Mexico. Look at Brazil and Kuwait. We're all better in those countries. Even the US, our environmental rankings better. The other column I want to do is corruption, because that's a big issue with business. In order to get into certain countries, there's a lot of kickbacks and different things that go on. Canada's ranked in the top 10 in terms of very favorable for business and doesn't have the corruption issues. But look at what you see with China. You see it's ranked 100. You look at Saudi Arabia, it's ranked 55. Look at Russia, it's ranked at 136. So all these aspects about you're hearing about oil, dirty oil in Canada, but nobody ever looks at corruption, environmental, or democracy rankings. And that's something that people should bear in mind when they're talking about oil. Greenhouse gases. I just wanted to show you the list here to basically the top 10 emitters and basically how they rank. Now let's talk about annual imports of oil, because there's a big push on the Canada East pipeline to move oil, which is currently going by rail, which we see is more of a disaster in terms of things because the rail wasn't designed to do that. We're seeing basically where we get a lot of our oil from Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And what are those countries again? They're huge issues with the way they operate in terms of environmental, in terms of democracy, in terms of corruption. And yet nothing's ever said about those countries because guess what? People are okay with getting that oil to come in here. And that's something where Canada should be taking a stand, yet nothing's said about that. This graph shows you no matter what we do, we cannot go immediately away from a carbon-based economy. This one's actually showing you point blank what the impact is on parts of the economy. I want to show you this graph, people, because most people, you like pictures. Some of you have a car, some of you have a cell phone, some of you like munchies, some of you like to go out for a beer, some of you take public transits. All of those products have some sort of footprint back to carbon, whether that's steel, whether it's plastics, whether it's the fuel itself on delivery. It's all part of the production cycle. So if you think that tomorrow you can go through it without carbon base, then you're sorely mistaken. It'll take a long time before you can phase that out. And this is why it's critical for people to understand, despite what the UN says in Agenda 21, we cannot go away from that unless we start really looking at how those component products do are substitute products. And we're nowhere near that. And that's something you need to bear in mind as you're talking oil. Thank you.